The wrapping paper still clung to my fingers when my granddaughter scoffed, "Grandpa left you nothing, that's why you give nothing." As I folded the torn edge, I didn't answer, just watched her pass down the same hallway he built for me. While their laughter filled the room, I slipped the safe key from behind my wedding ring. The same key he gave me the night before his stroke, hidden, notarized, untouched. That's when I opened the deposit box and the bank manager whispered, "Ma'am, this account was never closed." So I walked out alone, because love gave me more than they ever knew how to steal. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Snow hadn't fallen in Portland that December, but Eric's house still carried the heavy gray chill of winter, thick clouds pressed low, the kind that made every porch light glow a little lonelier. Marjorie stepped inside carrying a small tin wrapped in plaid ribbon, her boots damp from the mist outside. The living room was warm, crowded with twinkling lights and the chatter of people who weren't really listening to each other. The air smelled of cinnamon air freshener and Dana's expensive candles. A tree glittered in the corner, covered in ornaments that looked like they belonged in a catalog. No one noticed Marjorie at first. She approached the coffee table and set down the tin of cookies she'd spent the last 2 nights baking, ginger snaps dusted with sugar, her late husband's favorite. She smoothed the ribbon once, quietly proud of the effort, the time, the intention. Ava glanced over from the couch, phone in hand. Her perfectly winged eyeliner didn't budge as she leaned toward her brother with a smirk that wasn't meant to be subtle. "At least get her a GoFundMe," she whispered, except she made sure the whisper wasn't soft at all. Colton snorted, tossing a throw pillow aside. "Grandma's gifts are Depression-era," he didn't even look her way when he said it. Dana took a long sip of wine, eyes flicking to Marjorie before drifting away again. Not a correction, not a softening. Just a faint smile tucked behind the rim of her glass, as if mockery was background noise she'd grown comfortable with. Eric emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of appetizers. He saw the tension, hesitated, then sighed. "They're kids," he muttered, as if that explained everything, as if that made it harmless. But Marjorie felt the words settle into her ribs, sharp and cold. She forced a small smile and opened the cookie tin. "I just thought," her voice wavered. She stopped, steadied herself, and tried again. "I thought you might enjoy something homemade." Ava didn't respond. She was too busy angling her phone toward the plate for a quick picture, fingers flying across the screen. Colton picked up a cookie and bit into it with theatrical exaggeration, making a face before tossing it back onto the plate. Dana laughed softly. "Oh, Colton," she said, as though he were performing a harmless party trick. Marjorie folded her hands together, trying to hide the tremor in her fingers. She had baked those cookies carefully, measuring each spoonful of spice the way her mother once taught her. She had wrapped them hoping they'd carry warmth into a room that rarely made space for her. But now the tin looked small and out of place among the glossy gift bags piled under the tree. A timer beeped in the kitchen. Dana drifted away to check the roast. Eric followed, muttering something about needing to baste it. Ava and Colton returned to their screens, sliding seamlessly back into their own world. No one seemed to notice that Marjorie hadn't moved. She stood there with her coat still on, the air around her growing heavier by the second. The lights from the tree blinked slowly, reflecting off her glasses tiny bursts of color that felt distant, disconnected from the moment unfolding in front of her. Her chest tightened, not dramatically, not outwardly, just enough that she found herself pressing a hand against her coat, grounding herself. "I think I'll head out," she said softly. Eric poked his head out of the kitchen doorway. "Already, Mom, dinner soon." But he didn't step toward her, he didn't ask why, he didn't look closely enough to see the hurt she was trying to hide. "It's been a long day," she replied. "I should get home." She lifted her coat collar, slipped out the door, and walked into the cold Portland evening. The mist touched her cheeks, cooling the sting behind her eyes. Across the street, holiday lights blurred in the distance. Marjorie paused, tightening her grip on her coat sleeve. For the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her, quiet, small, but unmistakable. A line had been crossed. And she would not go back to pretending she hadn't felt it. The bus ride home took less than 15 minutes, but it felt longer each passage. NG block lined with dark, wet pavement and windows glowing faintly behind curtains. By the time Marjorie stepped into her living room, the quiet inside her house felt both comforting and painfully empty. She shut the door gently, as though even the sound of it closing might crack something in her chest. She hung her coat on the hook by the entryway, but her hands didn't leave the fabric right away. She stood there for a long moment, steadying her breath until the tightness finally loosened enough for her to move. The small one-story home felt exactly as it always did, clean, modest, still carrying traces of orange blossom from the cleaner she used earlier that week. Yet tonight the silence pressed closer, as if waiting for her to acknowledge something she had ignored for years. She walked to the couch and lowered herself carefully, the cushions soft beneath her ribs. Her purse rested at her feet. Slowly she reached inside and pulled out the small brass key she had carried for decades. The metal was worn smooth, warm from her touch. She set it on her palm and stared at it, the etched numbers catching the lamplight, 314. The same engraving she had memorized without ever acting on. A breath shivered through her, pulling her backward in time. The memory rose so clearly it almost felt like she was there again, standing in the kitchen on a late evening 30 years earlier. Rain tapped the window. Frank, her husband, held her hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles. He placed the key in her palm. "Someday you might need this," he told her, voice low, steady, "not for emergencies, for respect." Marjorie had laughed then, thinking he was being dramatic. "What on earth would I need a bank box for?" she asked. His expression didn't change. "If you're ever disrespected or cornered," he said quietly, "open the box." She remembered rolling her eyes affectionately. Frank always planned ahead, kept receipts, labeled boxes, believed in safety nets she never thought they'd need. She tucked the key into her jewelry dish and called it sentimental, nothing more. But the memory felt different now, sharp, clear, as though Frank's voice had been waiting all these years for the exact moment she'd need to hear it. Her grandkids' laughter echoed faintly in her mind, not the words but the tone, the dismissal, the certainty that she had nothing to offer, the ease with which they treated her like clutter in the corner. She closed her fingers around the key. Tonight, the humiliation sat heavier, like a weight finally making itself known after too many years of pretending it didn't exist. She wasn't crying, she'd already passed that point. What she felt now was closer to resolve, slow and steady, rising from a place she didn't know she still had strength. Marjorie leaned forward, picked up her reading glasses and placed them on the bridge of her nose. Her laptop sat on the coffee table. She opened it, waited for the faint hum to settle, then typed the numbers engraved on the key into the search bar. Bank of Portland, Eastside Branch. Safe Deposit Vault Access. The address popped up. She stared at the map, tracing the route in her mind across the Burnside Bridge, past the old thrift store, 2 blocks down from the diner where she used to meet Frank for coffee when he worked overtime. It was still there. Still open. Still holding whatever he had intended her to find. Her pulse steadied, not fast, just sure. Marjorie closed the laptop softly, holding the key between her fingers one more time before setting it on the table. For the first time since she'd left Eric's house, her breath lifted without catching. Tomorrow she would go. In one way or another, she would learn what Frank had been protecting all along. Morning arrived gray and quiet, the kind of Portland winter light that made every surface look muted and soft. Marjorie woke earlier than usual, the key resting on her nightstand exactly where she'd placed it the night before. She didn't reach for it right away. Instead, she sat at the edge of the bed and let the stillness settle around her. She needed to know one way or another what Frank had left behind. After making tea, she dialed the number for the Eastside branch, the same bank she and Frank once used for simple savings deposits. Her voice wavered only on the first syllable before steadying. "Safe deposit access?" the teller repeated. Papers rustled faintly through the receiver. "Yes, Mrs. Delaney, box 314 is active. You're listed as the sole authorized holder." No hesitation, no questions. "Would you like to schedule a retrieval appointment?" Marjorie exhaled slowly. Yes, tomorrow morning. She hung up, her hand lingering near the phone as something unfamiliar flickered through her, anticipation maybe, or fear, or both. By mid-morning, she stepped outside for a walk, pulling her coat tighter against the sharp air, the cold bit at her fingers stiffening them until they ached. She turned toward the small thrift Up a few blocks down, the one with mismatched mannequins in the window and a bell that jingled when the door opened. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric softener. She browsed quietly until she found a pair of brown leather gloves, worn but warm. When she pulled them on, her hands finally stopped trembling. As she paid at the counter, her phone buzzed in her pocket, a notification, then another. She stepped aside and unlocked the screen. Dana had posted a picture, her holiday table full of store-bought desserts, glittering decor, cluttered luxury. The caption read, "Some families get real gifts, some get handmade cookies, bless their hearts." A winking emoji followed. Beneath it, Ava had commented, "If Grandma had money, trust me, we'd know." Colton added a laughing reaction. Something inside Marjorie tightened, not the sharp pain from the night before, but something steadier, deeper. A line of defense forming quietly beneath the hurt. She took a screenshot, then another, each image saved with clinical precision. The thrift shop door chimed behind her as she stepped back onto the sidewalk. The sky had darkened, mist clinging to the air like breath on glass. She pulled her gloves tighter, pressing warmth into her palms. Her chest felt hollow for a moment, not breaking, just empty. A loneliness she didn't often name curled close, settling under her collarbone, but she didn't cry, not here, not now. She'd done enough swallowing of emotions over the years. Today she needed clarity, not softness. She walked slowly toward home, the wet pavement reflecting car headlights in long streaks. Each step felt deliberate, as if she were moving closer to something she couldn't yet see but knew was waiting. When she reached her porch, she paused, glancing down at the key tucked safely in her coat pocket. A small weight, a quiet promise. Inside, she set her bag on the table and placed the screenshots into a new digital folder. Evidence, not for revenge but for truth, proof of how far the disrespect had stretched when no one was looking. Then she made herself a fresh cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, hands still wrapped in the gloves, letting the warmth seep into her bones. Tomorrow the vault door would open. And whatever Frank had hidden, whatever he believed she would someday need, was finally within reach. She touched the key through her coat pocket, steadying herself. Some part of her already sensed. Whatever she found tomorrow would change everything. The next morning broke colder than the last, Portland winter clinging to every surface like frost without the shimmer. Marjorie dressed carefully, buttoning her coat with slow, practiced movements, slipping the brass key into her glove before stepping outside. She didn't want to feel it, just the reassurance of its weight. The bus ride to the East Side branch rattled over damp asphalt, windows fogging at the corners. When she got off, the bank stood ahead, squat and beige, the kind of building no one noticed unless they needed something from it. She paused at the entrance, gathering herself. Inside, the lobby hummed with low conversation and the muted shuffle of customers. The smell of old carpet and copy toner drifted through the air. Marjorie approached the counter, where a woman in a navy blazer looked up, dark hair graying at the edges, kind eyes framed by thick glasses. "Morning," the woman said, then paused, her gaze sharpened. "Delaney, are you Frank's wife?" Marjorie blinked, "Yes." The woman's posture softened into recognition. "I'm Sylvia Hart. I handled your husband's accounts back in the day. He was honest and deliberate." Her voice took on a tone reserved for people long gone but deeply remembered. Everything he did had purpose. Purpose, the word settled in Marjorie's chest, steadying her. "I'm here for a safe deposit box," she said quietly. Sylvia nodded, guiding her toward a door at the back. The air cooled as they stepped inside. The hallway beyond was narrower than she remembered from years ago, metal walls lined with identical doors, each holding someone's secrets. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Marjorie rubbed her gloved hands together, breath fogging as they walked. "The vault runs cold to preserve documents," Sylvia explained gently as if sensing her shiver. "It's normal." But the chill felt deeper than temperature. It felt like the cusp of something she couldn't turn back from. They stopped at a brushed steel door. Sylvia unlocked it with a large master key, then stepped aside. "Box number?" she asked softly. 314, Marjorie whispered. Sylvia scanned the rows, fingers grazing numbers until she found it. She stepped back, giving Marjorie space. The key was suddenly heavier in her hand. Marjorie slid it into the lock. It resisted for half a second, 30 years of stillness protesting, then turned with a click that echoed down the hallway like a whisper made of metal. She pulled the handle. Box 314 slid out smoothly, dustless, as though the vault had been expecting her. Sylvia offered a private viewing room, a small, windowless space with a single table, one chair, and silence heavy enough to hear her own pulse. Marjorie set the box down and opened it. The first thing she saw was paper, thick envelopes yellowed at the edges but tightly sealed. Beneath them lay a velvet bag, deep burgundy and drawn closed with a gold cord. A ledger sat at the bottom, its leather cover worn and soft, the edges frayed. Marjorie reached for the top envelope. The handwriting stopped her cold. Frank S. Clean, careful lettering, the same script he used on birthday cards and lunchbox notes. The same slant that used to appear on grocery lists pinned to their refrigerator. She traced the words with her fingertip. "In case they ever forget your worth." Her throat tightened, a swell of emotion rising fast, too fast for her to swallow. She pressed the envelope to her chest, steadying her breath, letting the weight of Frank's foresight settle into her bones. She hadn't known what she expected to find, but it wasn't this. Not love turned into armor. Not preparation disguised as sentiment. Not a message meant for a moment he somehow knew would arrive. Her fingers trembled as she slid the envelope open. And inside, something thick and official glinted under the fluorescent light. Whatever Frank had guarded for 30 years was about to speak for itself. And Marjorie wasn't ready for what it would say. The envelope's contents slid into Marjorie's trembling hands: certificates, stamped forms, and a folded letter whose edges had yellowed with time. She set them aside carefully, her breath shallow, before reaching for the velvet bag nestled beneath them. The fabric was soft, its cord knotted tightly as if Frank himself had tied it with the intention that only she would ever open it. Her fingers hesitated before loosening the cord. When she poured the contents onto the table, the sound was unmistakable, heavy, metallic, a muted clatter that seemed far too loud in the tiny viewing room. Gold coins. Dozens of them. Round and gleaming even under the sterile fluorescent light. Old mint marks, years she didn't recognize, each one thick and weighty, the kind collectors guarded like heirlooms. For a moment, the world narrowed to the shimmer spreading across the table. Frank had never been a man of extravagance. He clipped coupons, reused nails, patched jackets instead of buying new ones. The idea that he had quietly collected gold, real gold, felt surreal, almost impossible. She reached out, touching one lightly with her fingertip. It was warm from the room, solid, undeniable. Her throat tightened again. What else had he protected without telling her? She lifted the ledger next, its pages stiff but intact. The handwriting inside wasn't Frank's, it belonged to someone at the county office, judging by the slanted, official script. Parcel numbers. Coordinates. Transaction dates. Her own name appeared at the top of each entry. Marjorie Delaney, sole title holder. She blinked, confused, then she flipped to the page marked with a folded corner. A map. Not a city lot. Not a backyard extension. Acreage. Wide swaths of forest on the outskirts of Hood River, land she had never seen, never visited, never even heard mentioned. The ledger listed acquisition dates stretching back decades, some from before she and Frank had even married. Her pulse picked up speed. She lifted the notarized letter last. Frank's handwriting greeted her again, slow, steady, unmistakably his. Margie, if you are reading this, then the moment I feared for you has come. I hid these assets for one reason only: protection. My siblings circled anything with value like vultures, and I did not want you left fighting them when I was gone, so I moved everything out of reach and into your name, quietly, legally, permanently. Her breath hitched. You deserve safety, you deserve respect. And if anyone ever makes you feel small, I want you to know the truth. Your life is not small, not now, not ever. She pressed the page to her chest, eyes stinging not with grief but with an overwhelming surge of something she hadn't felt since Frank's funeral. Being seen. A soft knock sounded before the door eased open. Sylvia stepped in gently, her expression warm but curious. May I? She asked, gesturing to the ledger. Marjorie slid it toward her. Sylvia adjusted her glasses, scanning the entries. The deeper she read, the more her brow lifted. These parcels, she murmured, this is significant land, timber potential alone, my goodness. She sat, calculating figures in the margin of her notebook. Even conservatively, the acreage is worth far more than it was in the 90s, and these coins, some of them are rare. You're looking at, she paused, meeting Marjorie's eyes, more than most people save in a lifetime. Marjorie's breath stalled, not from shock but from the slow, dawning truth settling into her bones. Her life hadn't been small. Her marriage hadn't been modest. Her worth hadn't vanished just because her family had forgotten how to see it. For the first time, she felt the full weight of Frank's trust in her and the power she had never allowed herself to claim. Sylvia closed the ledger carefully. You'll want an estate attorney, she said softly, immediately. Marjorie nodded, fingers closing around Frank's letter. Outside, she could hear faint footsteps, someone else approaching the vault area. But Sylvia's voice had gone still. Mrs. Delaney, she said quietly, glancing toward the door, I think someone followed you here. Marjorie froze. Sylvia stepped into the doorway, blocking most of the hall from view. Her calm expression had shifted, still polite but sharper at the edges. It's probably nothing, she murmured, but let's move to my office, we can talk there. Marjorie gathered the documents, sliding the gold coins and ledger carefully back into the vault box. Her pulse thudded in her ears as they exited the viewing room. The cold air of the vault seemed to cling to her even after the heavy door shut behind them. Sylvia led her to a small glass-walled office near the lobby. Inside, the lights felt warmer. The noise of the bank sounded distant, softened. When Marjorie sat down, Sylvia locked the door not out of fear but out of respect for privacy. Whatever you saw in that box, Sylvia said, settling across from her, it deserves protection. The word struck Marjorie again, echoing Frank's letter. Protection. Sylvia pulled a stack of forms from a drawer. We can begin the transfer process today. Everything goes into a private trust under your name. It won't be part of probate. It won't be visible to public record. And, she lowered her voice, family can't access it without explicit authorization. Marjorie's fingers tightened around the envelope holding Frank's letter. Is it complicated? Not complicated, Sylvia said, just important. For the next half hour, they worked through quiet questions: beneficiaries, trustee selection, asset categories. Marjorie answered slowly but confidently, surprising herself with how decisive her voice sounded. Not timid, not uncertain, just firm. When the initial paperwork was complete, Sylvia picked up her phone. I'd like you to meet with an estate attorney, someone who can finalize everything and build the legal framework. She dialed quickly. Helen, it's Sylvia. I have a client who needs a private consult today. There was a pause on the line, then Sylvia smiled. Yes, I thought you'd say that. She hung up and looked at Marjorie. Helen Klein will see you this afternoon. The name sparked recognition. Helen was known in the senior community as the woman people visited when they wanted their affairs handled quietly and correctly. She didn't waste time. She didn't miss details. A taxi brought Marjorie downtown. The winter sky hung low, pressing against the tops of the buildings. When she entered Helen's office, the air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paper. Helen stood to greet her, a woman with cropped silver hair, sharp eyes, and an expression that softened only when she saw how tightly Marjorie held her purse. Come in, she said gently, let's take a look. They sat at a long walnut table. Marjorie set the vault documents down, one by one: the coin inventory, the land descriptions, the notarized letter, the ledger. Helen's eyes widened fractionally, though her tone remained composed. This is significant, she murmured, more than most trusts I've built in the last year. She flipped through the land maps, her eyebrows lifting higher. These parcels alone, Mrs. Delaney, you're sitting on a level of security most people never realize they have. Marjorie took a slow breath, her voice came out softer than she intended. I don't want my humiliation rewarded. Helen looked up sharply. Explain. Marjorie clasped her hands together. The people who made me feel small, they shouldn't benefit from what my husband protected. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. Helen nodded, closing the folder with deliberate care. That can be arranged. A trust can be shielded completely. Your heirs only receive what you choose. No one can override that, not with influence, pressure, or expectation. Something shifted inside Marjorie, like a weight lifting off a beam that had bent under it for years. For the first time since the Christmas disaster, her spine lengthened, her shoulders loosened, her breath deepened. Anchored. Helen began drafting the formal structure, typing quickly, her tone decisive and sure. You'll leave here today with a plan no one can dismantle. But as she typed, her assistant knocked and poked her head inside. Miss Klein, there's someone in the lobby asking if Mrs. Delaney is here. Marjorie's chest tightened. Helen's fingers stilled above the keys. Who? She asked. The assistant hesitated. He said he's family. Marjorie's world went still. 2 days passed before Eric called. His voice was warm in the way people sound when they want something but haven't decided how to ask for it yet. Mom, Dana thought maybe you'd like to come for dinner again, just family, nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. Nothing honest either. But Marjorie accepted. A small part of her was curious to see what they thought they knew and what they didn't. Rain misted the windshield of the bus as she rode across town. By the time she stepped onto Eric's porch, the lights spilling from the windows felt too bright, too staged, like a set someone had rearranged in a hurry. Dana opened the door before she could knock. Marjorie, oh, your sweater is lovely. The compliment landed awkwardly like a mismatched button sewn on wrong. Dana never commented on her clothes unless it was to suggest alternatives. Tonight, her smile stretched too wide and her perfume hovered in the air like a cloud rehearsed for company. Thank you, Marjorie replied gently, brushing a bit of lint from her sleeve. Inside, Ava sat at the kitchen island, pretending she wasn't watching the doorway. She slid her phone face down, something she almost never did. Her tone was sugary, the kind teenagers use when they're trying out adulthood but skipping sincerity. Grandma, how have you been? Like financially, doing okay with bills lately? Eric groaned quietly behind her, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Marjorie's heart tightened, but not from hurt, from clarity. I manage, she said simply. Ava blinked as if expecting a different answer. Oh, well, that's good. Colton strolled in next, snatching a dinner roll on his way to the table. Maybe Grandma finally hit the lotto, he joked, grinning as though waiting for applause. Marjorie didn't give him any. She set her purse down, smoothing her sweater again, a small gesture to steady herself. No lottery, she said lightly. Eric stepped forward then, trying to gather the moment into something normal. Let's eat, he said quickly. Dana made pot roast. Dinner felt different from the holiday gathering. Quieter, too quiet. Every clink of a fork sounded loud against the forced small talk. Dana kept glancing at Marjorie's hands as if expecting jewelry that wasn't there. Ava peeked at her phone between bites, trying to be discreet, clearly waiting for something she hoped to catch. Colton sat slouched, studying her with the blunt curiosity of someone searching for clues he didn't understand. Eric tried to keep things moving. Work's been busy, he said. Kids have school events, you know life. But no one was listening to him. They were watching her. Measuring her. Searching for signs. Marjorie recognized the shift instantly. The way people behave when they think something valuable is in the room but they can't find it. Dana leaned forward, elbows on the table, tone coated in sweetness. You know, if you ever need help organizing finances or anything like that, we'd be happy to assist. Really. The offer dangled there, too eager. I appreciate it, Marjorie said calmly, but I'm comfortable handling things myself. A beat of silence followed, tight, fragile. Ava swallowed a sip of water, staring over the rim of her glass. Grandma, are you sure everything's okay? Marjorie smiled softly, folding her napkin with deliberate care. Everything is exactly as it should be. It was the truth, they just didn't know what it meant. The conversation flickered out after that, each of them returning to their plates but not their ease, watching her, wondering, guessing. Every gesture she made seemed to spark suspicion. Her world had shifted. Theirs hadn't caught up yet. When dessert was finished, Marjorie rose to collect her things. Eric walked her to the door, worry etched across his face. "We're glad you came," he murmured. "I'm glad too," she said. But as she stepped onto the porch light buzzed overhead and her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message. From an unknown number. 3 words. "I know everything." And her breath stilled. The unknown message stayed in Marjorie's phone all night, glowing like a warning she refused to touch. She powered the device off before bed, but the words lived under her skin until morning. By dawn, she had already decided she would not respond. Not yet. Instead, she made oatmeal, fed the cat next door through her fence as she always did, and walked to the mailbox with a steadiness that surprised even her. The world outside moved as it usually did, gray sky, dripping rooftops, neighbors scraping frost from windshields, but the undercurrent in her life was shifting. And she wasn't the only one who felt it. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Coleman from 3 houses down tapped at Marjorie's door. Her breath puffed in little clouds as she clutched a grocery bag to her chest. "I just wanted to check on you," she whispered. "Dana said you might be declining, something about assisted living being the safer option." A cold hum threaded through Marjorie's stomach. Declining. Safer option. Dana's vocabulary was always coated in sugar and poison. "Thank you for stopping by," Marjorie replied softly. "I'm perfectly capable." Mrs. Coleman seemed relieved but also embarrassed, as though she'd realized too late she'd been fed a lie. She left quickly, muttering about how people shouldn't meddle where they don't belong. As soon as the door shut, Marjorie retrieved her binder, new, black, and empty except for the plastic sleeves she'd added after her meeting with Helen. She wrote the date at the top of the first page and documented the conversation word for word. Her handwriting was steady, purposeful. She had learned from Frank, anything worth protecting deserved a record. Later, she sat at her small kitchen table scrolling through her phone. She avoided messages from her family, but curiosity nudged her towards social media, and there it was, the second blow. Ava had posted a TikTok titled "When Your Grandparents Think Homemade Gifts Count Skull." The camera showed expensive packaging, name-brand shopping bags, glittering decorations. Off-screen, Marjorie's voice could be faintly heard. In the background from Christmas night, offering cookies. Ava had layered music over her voice, mocking it. Marjorie watched it only once. She didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Didn't crumble. She simply took a screenshot, then another, then captured the comments, people laughing, agreeing, calling handmade gifts sad. She placed them in the binder too. That evening, the doorbell rang. She expected Mrs. Coleman again, or perhaps the neighbor dropping off mail by mistake, but when she opened the door, Frank Alvarez stood on her porch holding 2 paper bags of groceries. Her husband's best friend since childhood. The only man left who remembered the early years of her marriage. "You looked tired last time I saw you," Frank said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Figured you could use something warm." He unpacked soup, bread, tea, and a small jar of the honey he always kept on hand. No pity in his movements, just quiet loyalty. "You deserve better than the way they've been treating you," he said as he placed the groceries on the counter. "You always have." Marjorie swallowed. The words struck deeper than her family's cruelty because they reminded her she wasn't imagining any of it. "Thank you," she murmured. They shared tea at the table while rain tapped the windows. Frank didn't pry, didn't ask about the details. She wasn't ready to speak aloud. He simply sat there, a steady presence in a world suddenly shifting beneath her feet. When he left, the house felt strangely fuller, as though someone had reinforced the beams without her noticing. She returned to her binder, sliding the newest notes in behind the rest. Helen had told her silence was sometimes a strategy, not a surrender. Tonight silence felt like armor. But as she closed the binder and turned off the lamp, headlights swept across her living room wall, slow, deliberate, pausing at her front curb. The car idled there. No one stepped out. No engine cut off. Just a quiet, watching presence in the dark. Marjorie's breath held. Someone wasn't finished with her. The next morning, the car that had idled by her curb was gone. Marjorie stood at the window for a full minute, watching the empty street, listening for an engine that didn't return. Fine. Whoever wanted to rattle her would have to try harder. She dressed neatly, smoothed her hair, and carried her binder, now heavier with evidence, onto the bus headed toward the East Side branch. Sylvia had asked her to come in for the full evaluation, the kind of appointment people made only when something substantial was at stake. Marjorie kept her breathing even the entire ride. When she entered the bank, Sylvia greeted her with a seriousness Marjorie hadn't seen before. She led her into a private room, curtains drawn, door closed, a single long table covered with files, calculators, and a laptop open to valuation software. "Ready?" Sylvia asked. Marjorie nodded. Sylvia adjusted her glasses and opened the first folder. "Let's start with the land." She spread out maps like cards on a table, parcels of forest, fields, and hillside acreage Marjorie still struggled to believe bore her name. "In the last 30 years, these areas have appreciated significantly," Sylvia said, tracing the timberland with her pen. "Development interest has increased, conservation interest has increased. The value," she paused, tapping her calculator, "is nearly triple what it was when Frank acquired it." Marjorie blinked. "Triple?" Sylvia nodded. "At minimum." The room felt suddenly too small. She clasped her hands beneath the table. Next came the Treasury bonds, stacks of them, purchased decades ago and left untouched. "These matured 10 years ago," Sylvia explained, "and interest has continued compounding, very safely, I might add." She turned the screen around. The numbers didn't look real. Next, the gold coins, carefully catalogued, photographed under proper lighting, compared against auction histories. Sylvia's tone shifted into reverence. "Some of these are rare mints. Collectors would pay significantly above spot value," she tapped her notes, "some even 5 times above." Marjorie's breath lodged in her throat. Frank, quiet, steady, patched his coat twice. Frank had been hiding a fortune behind years of gentle smiles and careful budgeting. When Sylvia finished running totals, she lifted her eyes. "Mrs. Delaney, with the land, the bonds, the coins, and the certificates, your trust now sits comfortably above $3 million. The words floated in the air like a foreign language. $3 million. Quietly. Secretly. Safely. Marjorie didn't smile, didn't gasp. She simply felt something settle inside her, something deep and grounding, a truth she hadn't realized she needed. She had never been insignificant. Her life had never been small. People had simply underestimated her. When she met with Helen later that afternoon, the attorney scanned the new totals with raised brows. "This changes everything," Helen said, "and it warrants updating your will immediately. You'll want stronger protections and a revised allocation to reflect the trust structure." Marjorie nodded, fingers lightly brushing the binder beside her. "Do whatever protects it best." Helen began outlining amendments, ironclad clauses, updated trustee instructions, restrictions that ensured certain relatives could never exploit loopholes. The low murmur of legal discussion filled the office. Until it didn't. Because outside Helen's half-open door, a shadow paused. Dana. Her glossy hair, her tense jaw, her face paling as she overheard only a sliver. $3 million transfer complete, protected from heirs. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening with something between panic and calculation. "Mrs. Delaney," Helen asked, noticing Marjorie had gone still, "everything all right?" Marjorie didn't answer immediately. She raised her eyes to the doorway just as Dana stepped back, too fast for it to be innocent. Marjorie's heartbeat steadied, cold and sure. Dana knew. And she would not keep that knowledge to herself. Marjorie didn't sleep well that night. Not from fear but from clarity. If Dana overheard even a fraction of what Helen said, the ripple would reach her porch by morning, and it did. At 8:12 a.m. the first knock came. When Marjorie opened the door, Ava stood there holding a plastic grocery bag with a logo the girl usually mocked. "Hi, Grandma," Ava chirped, too bright, too staged. "I brought muffins." They were still in the store container. A discount sticker clung crookedly to the plastic lid. Ava pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, darting a glance past Marjorie into the house as though searching for something. "I thought maybe we could hang out, talk." There was a tremor beneath her words, a rehearsed softness, brittle at the edges. Marjorie kept her voice gentle. "Thank you, leave them on the table." Ava set the package down, flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and lingered like she wanted to ask a question she didn't dare voice. Instead, she murmured, "It's really good seeing you," then hurried back to the car where Dana sat waiting in the driver's seat. The second knock came 20 minutes later. This time Colton shuffled in the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes flicking everywhere but her face. "So, he mumbled, "I didn't mean the jokes, it's just humor, everyone teases relatives, it's like normal." Normal. The word floated between them like dust. Marjorie folded her arms lightly. "Thank you for saying that." He nodded too quickly, as if relieved she hadn't pressed him. "Okay, cool." He backed away, nearly tripping over the porch step before darting down the walkway. The third knock came right as she'd expected. Dana. She held a bouquet too large for the occasion, roses, lilies, filler greenery bursting out like a parade float. The kind meant not to express affection but to announce something. "Marjorie," she breathed, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, we all have." Her tone dripped with syrup, her smile stretched thin. "These are lovely," Marjorie said, taking the flowers with polite steadiness. Dana exhaled dramatically, palms pressed together. Families go through rough patches, miscommunications, we should all try to reconnect, build bridges." Marjorie studied her for a long moment, her stiff posture, her darting eyes, the slight tremble in her fingers. Dana wasn't here out of guilt. She was here out of fear. Before Marjorie could respond, another voice approached from the walkway. "Eric." He jogged up the steps, slightly out of breath, offering an anxious smile that looked more like an apology he hadn't finished shaping. "Mom, we were just talking. We think it'd be good for us to, spend more time together, reset things." Reset. Erase the last few days. Pretend ignorance had not been intentional. Marjorie nodded slowly, expression soft but unreadable. "I appreciate the visit." All three relaxed too visibly. They hovered in the doorway, waiting. Not one of them asked how she was. Whether she felt safe. Whether she needed anything. Whether the car outside her house last night had frightened her. They asked nothing about her, only circled around her circumstances with the greedy caution of people who wanted information but feared asking outright. She recognized it instantly. They didn't want connection. They wanted reassurance. Reassurance that whatever they thought they'd learned wasn't as bad as it sounded. Reassurance that the ground beneath their feet hadn't tilted. Reassurance that they weren't about to lose something they had assumed was theirs. Marjorie stepped back inside, the three of them still standing on the porch as if waiting for a cue she refused to offer. "Thank you for stopping by," she said kindly. "Have a good day." And she closed the door, not abruptly, not angrily, but with the same calm finality as a judge lowering a gavel. Silence returned until her phone buzzed. A new message. From the same unknown number as before. "They're not your biggest problem." Marjorie's fingers tightened around the phone. Someone else was watching. The morning of the meeting arrived with a crisp stillness, the kind that made Portland's winter air feel thin and metallic. Marjorie dressed without hurry. Her fingers moved with a calm that didn't quite feel like her own, more like a steadiness she'd borrowed from the woman Frank always believed she was. When she stepped into the East Side branch, the lobby was nearly empty. Light filtered through tall windows, casting long pale stripes across the carpet. She took a seat on a bench near the front desk, binder tucked neatly on her lap. For once, she wasn't the one waiting to see how others would treat her. Sylvia emerged from her office, spotted her, and her face broke into an unguarded warmth. "Mrs. Delaney," Sylvia said, crossing the room, "good to see you." She touched Marjorie's arm with the familiarity of someone who already respected her. It was a small gesture, tiny, almost forgettable. Until the front doors opened. Eric walked in first, his shoulders hunched, eyes darting. Behind him, Dana swept inside in a fitted coat that didn't quite hide her agitation. Ava followed, clutching her phone. Colton trailed last, slower, squinting at the room as if expecting treasure to be lying out on a counter. They spotted Sylvia's hand on Marjorie's arm. And they froze. Dana's eyes widened first. "Sylvia." Greeting Marjorie. "Like that." "Mom," Eric said, stepping forward cautiously, "you're early." Marjorie rose. "I try to be punctual." Dana's gaze flicked between the two women, suspicion flaring like a struck match. She opened her mouth to ask something sharp, but Sylvia stepped in smoothly. "We've prepared the conference room for you," she said to Marjorie. "Helen just arrived." The family stiffened at the name. Helen? The attorney. The one who handled large estates. Protected assets. Guarded legacies. They followed as a group, but only Marjorie walked as though she belonged there. The others moved like tourists, suddenly realizing the museum cost more than they thought. Inside the glass-walled room, Helen was already unpacking folders onto the table. She straightened when Marjorie entered. "Mrs. Delaney," she said professionally, "I've finalized the documents we discussed." She handed Marjorie a stack of paperwork, pages of precise clauses, protection layers, trustee designations, and sealed schedules of assets. Everything Marjorie had chosen. Everything she had earned. Everything she would defend. Dana stepped forward abruptly, eyes wide, voice too loud for the small space. "Is that," she breathed, pointing at the stack, "inheritance paperwork?" The question trembled with equal parts fear and hope. Ava leaned in, biting her lip. Eric's throat bobbed. Colton stood straighter, suddenly attentive. Marjorie didn't hesitate. "No," she said calmly, meeting Dana's gaze without blinking, "not for you." The words landed with the precision of a hammer striking glass. Dana's mouth fell open, Ava's jaw tightened, Eric's face drained of color as though something he'd been praying wasn't true had just crystallized in front of him. Helen continued speaking, explaining signatures, protections, execution dates, but their family no longer heard her. Their attention was trained solely on Marjorie, as if seeing her for the first time. Not fragile. Not meek. Not a woman waiting to be included. A woman in control. Marjorie picked up the pen Sylvia handed her. The weight of it felt different than every pen she had ever used, cooler, heavier, like it belonged to a person who finally understood her worth wasn't determined by the people who failed to recognize it. She signed the first page. Then the second. Dana stepped closer, desperation flooding her expression. "Marjorie, wait, just wait, please." Eric whispered, "Mom, don't do this." But Marjorie didn't look at them. She turned only to Helen. "Where do I sign next?" Helen pointed, firm and unflinching. Marjorie signed again. Eric's hand curled into a fist. Dana's breath hitched. Ava's eyes glistened with something almost like panic. The final page slid under her hand. Just as Marjorie lifted the pen, a voice outside the door rose sharply. "Sylvia's assistant. Ms. Klein, securities on the phone. Someone is demanding access to Mrs. Delaney's vault box." The room went still. Helen looked up. Sylvia stiffened. Marjorie's fingers tightened around the pen. Outside the glass wall, a tall figure paced near the lobby doors. Someone she hadn't seen in years. And not family. Someone who should not know that vault even exists. The pen slipped slightly in her grip. This wasn't over. Marjorie didn't stay to see how the confrontation in the lobby unfolded. She didn't need to. The moment Helen gathered the signed documents and Sylvia stepped toward security, Marjorie quietly closed her binder, slipped it into her purse, and rose with a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing just outside the glass walls. She walked out of the conference room without a single backward glance. Her family scrambled after her. Eric reached the hallway first, nearly tripping over a decorative planter. "Mom, wait a second." She continued toward the exit, her steps measured, her breath steady. Behind her, Dana hissed at someone, likely Helen or Sylvia, demanding answers she wasn't going to get. Ava clacked across the tile in boots too loud for the tension in the room. Colton lingered near the benches, wide-eyed, unsure which side he was supposed to stand on. When Marjorie pushed open the front door, cold air swept in, the kind that cleared the lungs and sharpened the spine. She stepped into it like stepping out of a long, stale room. Eric caught up with her halfway down the ramp. "Mom," he murmured, voice trembling at the edges, "just tell us." She kept walking. He tried again, quieter this time. "Are we in the wills?" The question hung between them, vulnerable, stripped of Dana's calculation and Ava's performance. Just a scared son asking a mother for reassurance he hadn't earned. Marjorie slowed but didn't turn fully. She let him see only her profile, a woman who had spent years shrinking herself for harmony, now refusing to be pressed inward again. "You'll see," she said softly. "Not cruel. Not taunting. Just true." Eric's shoulders sagged, as if he'd been holding out hope for a kind of mercy she wasn't offering anymore. Ava was next, jogging awkwardly down the ramp, calling out, "Grandma, hey, just hold on." Her voice cracked in places she didn't notice, or maybe she did. Maybe she'd practiced a gentler tone in the mirror that morning. She stopped in front of Marjorie, breath visible in the cold air. "I'm really sorry about everything," she tried. "I didn't mean the video and the cookies thing, it was just stupid, I was being stupid." She forced a shaky laugh. "I wasn't thinking." Marjorie met her eyes. The girl looked like she expected forgiveness to land immediately, like a vending machine she'd just inserted the apology into. Marjorie smiled softly. "I hear you, Ava." But she didn't offer absolution. Didn't offer comfort. Didn't offer a bridge. Ava's face faltered, the practiced apology losing momentum. Dana finally approached, heels clicking like an accusation. Her tone was carefully constructed, sweet at first, then splintering. "Marjorie," she said, clutching her purse strap like an anchor, "I just want to understand what's going on. Someone has clearly been influencing you, people at the bank, that attorney, you're not thinking clearly." Marjorie felt a small, surprising calm settle over her. She'd been waiting for this part, the moment Dana stopped pretending and began grasping. "I haven't been influenced by anyone," Marjorie replied evenly. Dana stepped closer. "Then why all the secrecy, why the drama, why the sudden?" Marjorie cut her off gently. "I've been influenced," she said, "by your behavior." The words were not loud, but they struck like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, sinking deep. Dana's expression cracked, panic flickered through her eyes, quickly masked by indignation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure how to recover. Colton lingered by the curb, watching with a hollow expression, unsure whether to be embarrassed or afraid. Marjorie continued toward the bus stop. None of them followed this time. They stood near the curb, clustered, confused, shaken, not united in concern for her, but united in the dawning fear that their roles in her future were no longer guaranteed. The bus arrived with a hiss, doors opening. Marjorie stepped on without looking back. As she sat by the window, the engine rumbling beneath her, she saw her family slowly turning toward their cars, each wearing a different version of dread. But something else caught her eye. Across the street, under the shadow of a leafless tree, a man stood watching her. Tall, still, familiar in a way that made her chest tight. He didn't wave. Didn't approach. Just watched. The bus pulled away. And Marjorie realized. Whoever that man was, he knew far more than he should. The day after the bank confrontation, Marjorie woke with a clear purpose humming beneath her ribs. The image of the man beneath the leafless tree lingered at the edges of her thoughts, but she set it aside for now. She had work to finish. Work Frank had started, work she refused to leave half done. She took the familiar bus downtown, binder in her lap, winter light filtering through fogged windows. Her reflection in the glass looked different today, not younger, not harder, but defined. A woman with edges sharpened by truth. Helen's office greeted her with its usual stillness: polished wood, soft light, the faint scent of cedar and ink. The attorney stood when Marjorie entered. "Mrs. Delaney," she said, voice respectful in a way that carried no pity, "will finalize everything today." They took their seats at the long walnut table. Helen pulled a new stack of folders forward, heavier than before, corners crisp, tabs neatly labeled. "This," Helen said, placing the first document in front of her, "is your revised will. The protections we discussed are all in place." Marjorie nodded, hands steady. "Walk me through it." Helen opened the folder, flipping pages with deliberate calm. "First, allocation of assets. The majority of your estate, including the trust fund's long-term distributions, will go to the Portland Senior Outreach Program and the Delaney Technical Scholarship Fund." A warmth settled low in Marjorie's chest. "Real legacy, quiet, useful human." Helen continued, "Next, your son." Marjorie's posture didn't change, but her breath grew quieter. "We created an emergency-only trust for Eric," Helen said. "Access is restricted to verified necessity, medical, housing, crisis relief, nothing discretionary, and importantly, his spouse has no legal pathway to influence or benefit from it." Marjorie exhaled. That was fair. Eric had been weak, not malicious, lost, not cruel. He deserved a lifeline, just not a windfall. "And the grandchildren?" Marjorie asked softly. Helen's expression remained professional, though her eyes showed a brief flicker of sympathy. "As you instructed, no financial inheritance, not directly, not indirectly. They are removed entirely." It didn't hurt the way she imagined it once might have. Some losses had occurred long before paper ever caught up. "And Dana," Helen added, sliding forward a separate page, "is explicitly barred from accessing, inheriting, or contesting any portion of the estate. Her exclusion is reinforced by multiple clauses. She cannot insert herself through marriage, guardianship, or proxy." A final door closed, quietly and permanently. Marjorie leaned back slightly, absorbing the solidity of it all. Frank would have approved. He'd always said that protection wasn't cruelty, it was care with boundaries. Helen reached for one last document. "There is one more beneficiary to confirm," she said carefully, "the supplemental personal gift designation." Marjorie smiled faintly. "Yes, that one is important." Helen flipped open the page, revealing a short line typed neatly beneath legal text. "To Lily O'Connor, in recognition of her constant kindness. Ava's best friend." The only teenager who had ever spoken to Marjorie with sincerity. Who brought her library books during flu season, shoveled her walkway last winter, and once, quietly deleted one of Ava's mocking posts before Marjorie could see it. A girl who had nothing, expected nothing, and treated everyone with dignity. Kindness deserved to be remembered. Helen nodded approvingly. "It's a thoughtful choice. She'll be protected and no one can challenge it." Marjorie lifted the pen. She signed the document for the senior centers. Signed the scholarship fund. Signed the emergency trust for Eric. Signed the exclusion for Dana. Signed the final beneficiary line. With each signature, the old version of her life fell away, dust swept from corners, weight lifted from beams. When she finished, Helen gathered the pages. "It's done," she said, "your legacy is secure." But the moment Helen slid the final folder into its envelope, her assistant appeared in the doorway, breathless, eyes wide. "Ms. Klein, I'm sorry to interrupt, but..." She looked at Marjorie. "There's someone downstairs asking for you again." Helen's head snapped up. "Who?" The assistant's voice lowered. "He won't give a name, but he says he knew your husband, and he says he needs to talk to Mrs. Delaney before her family does." Marjorie felt the room tilt, not with fear but with recognition. The man beneath the leafel. Tree had followed her here. And this time he wasn't watching. He was waiting. Marjorie cleaned the dining table slowly, not out of necessity but intention. Every movement felt like brushing away an older version of herself, the woman who once tried too hard, apologized too quickly, accepted too little. Tonight's dinner was simple by design. A pot of vegetable stew simmered quietly on the stove. A loaf of bread cooled on the counter. No decorations, no gifts, no holiday performance. Just plates, silverware, water glasses, and the faint scent of rosemary drifting through the house. A peaceful room prepared without fear. At 6 o'clock sharp, a knock came. Eric stood on the porch first, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. Dana lingered half a step behind him, hair perfect, expression carefully arranged. Ava and Colton hovered farther back, uncertain in a way that almost made them look younger. "Mom," Eric said, voice low, "thanks for having us." Marjorie smiled softly, "Come in." They stepped into the living room quietly, almost reverently, as if entering a place they used to treat casually but now feared disturbing. The table drew their eyes immediately, its bare simplicity, its lack of expectation. Dana blinked, thrown off by the absence of spectacle. She had come armed with a polite smile and a small hostess gift tucked in her purse, but seeing no gifts on the table, she palmed it awkwardly, unsure whether to give it or hide it. "This looks nice," she managed. Marjorie simply nodded. "Dinner is ready." The four of them took their seats slowly, like they weren't sure who should sit where anymore. Ava folded her phone face down for the first time in recent memory. Colton fidgeted with his napkin but didn't speak. Silence draped over the table like a thick cloth. Marjorie served the stew, passing bowls one by one. The only sounds were the soft clinks of spoons and the creak of chair legs on hardwood. Finally, Ava broke the quiet. "So, Grandma, how's your garden?" Her voice was soft, almost timid, as if she expected landmines hidden in the conversation. Marjorie smiled gently. "The winter kale survived the frost. My rosemary bush is enormous now. I think it's trying to take over the fence." A faint laugh escaped Colton before he caught himself. Dana kept her eyes on her bowl, her spoon trembling slightly. "That's wonderful." "And my book club is good," Marjorie continued. "We're reading a mystery next month." Ava nodded far too eagerly. "Mystery is great, that's great." Eric rubbed his palms together, searching for something to say. I've been thinking about planting tomatoes again this spring." "That's lovely," Marjorie said. She didn't fill the silence afterward. She didn't rescue them. She let them sit in the space they had created, months, years of their own carelessness pressing around them. Usually, Marjorie would have softened it for them. Tonight she let the truth breathe. The grandkids ate quietly, barely glancing at one another. Dana seemed to shrink in her seat, shoulders tight, face pale. She still wouldn't look directly at Marjorie, not because she didn't want to, but because she already knew the answer to the question she refused to ask. "Are we written out?" Eric's guilt colored every line on his face. He kept trying to speak, then losing the words before they reached his lips. The air held something heavy, not anger, not conflict. Understanding. They already knew. There was no need to talk about wills. Or trusts. Or vault boxes. Or signatures that could not be unwritten. So they talked about weather. And books. And the cat next door. Nothing more. When dinner ended, Marjorie stood and collected plates. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Her voice was kind, but the boundary beneath it was unmistakable, immovable. Eric rose slowly. "Mom, I." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We'll talk another time." His eyes glistened, he nodded. Ava hugged her quickly, not the dramatic, camera-ready version she used to give, but something smaller, fragile. "Thank you," she whispered, though she didn't say for what. Colton offered a timid smile and a barely audible, "Dinner was good." Dana lingered last, fingers wrapped around her purse strap. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed, "Good night, Marjorie." "Good night, Dana." No bitterness. No spite. No performance. Just truth. Marjorie walked them to the door and watched them descend the steps, their silhouettes pale under the streetlight, moving slowly as if each step weighed more than the last. When they reached the car, she closed the door firmly, not as rejection but closure. Her house fell quiet again. Peaceful again. Her peace. She took a breath, letting the softness return to her shoulders. She turned toward the kitchen to finish the dishes. And froze. Through the window above the sink, headlights glowed at the end of her street. A single car. Engine running. Unmoving. The same silhouette as he'd seen twice now. She stepped closer to the glass. This time the driver's door opened. And the man who stepped out into the cold night air was not a stranger. He was someone she recognized. Someone she hadn't seen since Frank's funeral. And he was walking toward her house. The man approaching her porch that night moved slowly, shoulders hunched against the cold. When he stepped into the glow of the porch light, Marjorie felt her breath ease, not with relief, but with recognition that softened the sharp edges of her worry. "Margie," he said gently. It was Harold Bennett, Frank's old co-worker from the factory, a man who had attended the funeral quietly, standing in the back, hands folded, grief restrained. He had never asked her for anything, never intruded. And now he wasn't intruding either. "I found a letter Frank gave me years ago," he explained softly, "said to bring it to you only when you looked like you needed it." His voice carried no urgency, no hunger, just loyalty to a friend long gone. He handed her a sealed envelope and stepped back. "I won't stay, just thought you should have it." Then he walked away, leaving no questions behind. Inside, Marjorie locked the door gently, the envelope trembling in her fingers. She sat at the kitchen table, the house still warm from dinner, and opened it. Frank's handwriting reached out from the page like a hand brushing her cheek. "Margie, if you're reading this, it means you've had to stand alone in a way I prayed you never would. You were always stronger than you believed. You don't need anyone's permission to live the life you deserve. Not your family's. Not mine. Build your world with people who value it and value you. Happy anniversary, my love." F. Her breath caught, not in sorrow, in recognition. He had seen this moment long before she arrived at it. She folded the letter carefully, holding it to her chest for a long, quiet beat. Then she slipped on her coat, picked up her purse, and walked into the night. Some things belong to memory. Others deserve protection. And this letter belonged somewhere safe. The next morning, Marjorie stood again in the East Side branch, but this time there was no trembling, no racing pulse. Sylvia greeted her warmly and escorted her to the vault without question. Marjorie placed Frank's anniversary letter inside the new safe deposit box, Box 117, where her trust documents and maps already rested. A sanctuary of paper and truth. She closed the door with a steady hand. For the first time in months, nothing inside her felt fragile. A week later, she sat in the community center's meeting room as the first Delaney Technical Scholarship applicants were discussed. Young faces filled the room, hopeful, nervous, bright. "Frank would love this," whispered one of the board members, an older man with kind eyes. "I hope so," Marjorie said. When she announced the scholarship criteria, there was quiet respect. No applause, no spectacle, just gratitude, the kind she understood best. At the end of the meeting, several seniors approached her. They thanked her gently with the soft hand squeezes and warm looks of people who knew the value of small kindnesses. "Frank raised a good woman," one said. Marjorie swallowed her emotion with a smile. "Frank believed in people, I'm just following his lead." 3 days later, Eric came alone. No Dana. No grandkids. Just a man who looked like he had been carrying too much for too long. "Mom," he said softly at the door, "I'm so sorry for everything, for not standing up, for not seeing what was happening." His voice cracked. Marjorie stepped aside and let him in. They sat on the couch, the afternoon light warm across the rug. "I can't fix the past," he whispered, "but I want to do better, I want to be better." She reached over and took his hand, not out of obligation, but out of love that had been bruised, not broken. "I forgive you," she said quietly. His shoulders sagged with something that looked like relief and grief braided together. "But," she added softly, "forgiveness doesn't mean losing boundaries, it means protecting peace for both of us." He nodded, accepting it without argument. It was the first honest moment between them in years. That night, Marjorie brewed tea, sat at her kitchen table, and opened her journal. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and ink, like Helen's office, like new beginnings, like the life she had chosen. She wrote a single sentence. My grandkids laughed that I was too broke for gifts until I opened the safe deposit box.